all feel as inspired and hopeful as I do after seeing the international students. And let's give them another hand. It actually brings tears to my eyes to think what's happened since Roots and Shoots began in 1991. And you notice there was a big representation from Tanzania, and that's because Roots and Shoots began in Tanzania. But I'll come back to Roots and Shoots presently. I must check on the time here. I'm not used to not having a podium. And I've got 40 minutes, so okay. So I want to spend a little moment telling you how it is that I got to be doing what I'm doing now. How did it all happen? A little girl born in England to a family with very little money. My grandfather, whom sadly I never met, was a congregational minister, so I was brought up as a Christian. And when I was only 5 years old, World War II broke out. And that had a big influence on my young life, because from a very early age, I was learning about war and some of my friends and family being killed. I was born with a love of animals. People say, Jane, how did you come to love animals? I was born that way. And I had an amazing mother, a mother who supported this love of animals. She didn't even get angry when she came to my bedroom. I was 1.5 years old, and I do not remember this story, but she tells me, she said, Jane, you were sitting up in bed, and you were looking down, and you had so much interest and so much curiosity. And she went over, and there in my bed was a big handful of wriggling earthworms. Instead of getting angry and saying, oh, throw those dirty things out, she just said very quietly, Jane, if you leave them here, they'll die. They need to be outside. And so we took them back into the garden. When I was just 4.5 years old, we went to stay on a farm in the country for 2 weeks, which was very exciting for me because we lived in London, not many animals in a big city. But now I was meeting cows and pigs and sheep face to face. No cruel, intensive factory farms back then. They were out in the fields, the way animals should be. And I was given a job to help collect the hens' eggs. And so every day I would take my little basket and I would look in the nest boxes, pop the egg into my basket. Apparently I began asking everybody, where does the egg come from? And nobody told me. I remember seeing a hen climbing up into a hen house and thinking, she's going to lay an egg. And I crawled after her, which was a big mistake. With squawks of fear, she flew out. But now I'm on the path of discovery, and this is the important thing. Now I'm going to find out. I waited in an empty hen house, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited, which was fine for me, but my family had no idea where I was. And they even called the police. I was gone for 4 hours. But my patience was rewarded, and a hen came in and laid an egg. And I don't know who was more excited, me or the hen. Anyway, so now you can imagine my mother was very worried. And yet when she saw this little girl running towards the house, instead of getting angry, how dare you go off without telling us, don't you dare do that again, which would have killed my excitement, she sat down to listen to the wonderful story of how a hen lays an egg. And the reason I tell that story, isn't that the making of a little scientist curiosity, asking questions, not getting the right answer, deciding to find out for yourself, making a mistake, not giving up, and learning patience. It was all there in that little child, and a different kind of mother might have crushed that curiosity, and I might not have done what I've done. So I always want to start with acknowledging the enormously important role that my mother played in my life. As I say, we didn't have much money, and when I was 10 years old, and after reading books about animals in Africa, I decided I would grow up, go to Africa, live with wild animals, and write books about them. Girls didn't become scientists in those days, but you could write books. So everybody laughed at me, Jane, how on earth will you get to Africa? You don't have money. Africa's far away. And you're just a girl. Girls don't do that sort of thing. But my mother said, Jane, if you really want this, then you must work really hard. You must take advantage of every opportunity, but don't give up. So that is a story I have shared with young people, particularly in disadvantaged communities all around the world. And I wish my mother was alive so that she could know how many people have said to me or written to me, Jane, I want to thank you because you've taught me that because you did it, I can do it too. And I sometimes have a feeling that she does know. I think she does. Anyway, I left school, no money for university, money for a secretarial course, boring, shorthand and typing and bookkeeping. But I did it. I had to get a job. And then came the opportunity, a letter from a school friend inviting me to Kenya to stay with her for a holiday. Couldn't save up money in London, so I found a job in a hotel around the corner from my home and worked as a waitress. Very hard work. And eventually, after about 4 or 5 months, I had saved up enough money to go to Kenya. In those days, no planes with tourists back and forth, so I went by boat. And it was 3.5 weeks. The first place I set foot on African soil was Cape Town, South Africa. Very beautiful. But after a bit, I noticed on every seat in the parks, on every door to a restaurant or a hotel, were these words in Afrikaans, which sound like slinks, flanks. And I asked, what do these words mean? Oh, they mean white people only. And I was shocked. I didn't grow up thinking about people in relation to the color of their skin. That's not how I was taught. And so, although I loved Cape Town because it was beautiful, I wanted to leave. And I was happy when the boat moved on. At any rate, I did get to Kenya. I stayed with my friend. And as all of you probably know, I got this amazing opportunity to go and study, live with, learn from, not just any animal, but the one most like us, the chimpanzees. My mentor was Dr. Louis Leakey, and he wanted somebody who hadn't been to university. He wanted somebody whose mind wouldn't be affected by the very, very rigid scientific attitude of that time. Fortunately, science has changed since then, but at that time it was very rigid, and it was actually thought that between us humans and all the other animals was a sharp line. We were superior. We had nothing to do with the other animals. And fortunately, I haven't been told that. And I got to Gombe National Park in Tanzania. And at first the chimpanzees ran away from me. They'd never seen a white ape before. And we are the 5th grade ape. At any rate, eventually I earned their trust. And the breakthrough came when I saw the first chimpanzee who began to lose his fear of me. I named him David Greybeard, had a beautiful white beard. And I saw him breaking off pieces of grass, pushing them into termite mounds, picking up the termites with his lips. I saw him break off leafy twigs, and to use those as tools, he had to carefully remove the leaves. If today you see an animal using and making a tool, it wouldn't be very exciting. Today we know that many animals can use tools, and some can make tools, because we know that animals are far more intelligent than we used to think. But back then, it was thought that humans and only humans used and made tools. We were man the tool maker. And so it was that observation that enabled Leakey to go to the National Geographic Society in America and get money for me to continue the research when the first little grant ran out. And they also sent a photographer and filmmaker, Hugo van Lauwijk, to record what I was beginning to find out about the chimpanzees. Most striking, how like us they are in their non-verbal communication, kissing, embracing, holding hands, patting one another on the back, holding out the hand, begging for food. And when males are competing for dominance, there's a lot of swaggering and bluffing. Some are more aggressive than others. Sometimes it reminds me of some human male politicians. No names mentioned. But I was fascinated too in the behavior of mothers and their offspring. If we look back over the years now, we're coming up to our 60th year of research in Gombe National Park. And if I look back over all the years, we find there are good chimpanzee mothers and less good chimpanzee mothers. And the good ones are affectionate, protective, not overprotective, but the most important thing, they are supportive. They support their young ones, just like my mother supported me. And we now know that the offspring of the supportive mothers do better. The males reach a higher position in the hierarchy, and the females make better mothers, and more offspring will survive. So, unfortunately, I found out that they also have a dark and brutal side, just like us, and they're capable of war, killing. But they also have a compassionate, loving, altruistic side, just like us. And I think the biggest difference between us, chimpanzees, and other animals is the explosive development of our intellect. Don't you think it's strange that the most intellectual creature to ever walk planet Earth is destroying its only home? We've sent rockets up to Mars, little robots taking photographs. And if any of you have seen those photographs, you don't really want to go and live on Mars. And that was promoted as maybe the best possible planet to support life. We've only got this one beautiful planet, planet Earth. And you know what we're doing to it and how we're destroying it. It was when I realized at a big conference where we brought chimpanzee researchers together, when I realized that chimpanzee numbers across Africa were dropping, that their habitat, their forest habitat, was being destroyed, that there was the beginning of the bushmeat trade, that's the commercial hunting of wild animals for food. Chimpanzees are like us. They can catch our infectious diseases. Human populations were growing, moving further into the forest. foreign logging and mining companies were coming in, moving further into the forest, destroying more of the forest, and carrying with them the risk of diseases to which the chimpanzees have built up no resistance. And at this conference, I arrived as a scientist. By that time, Leakey had made me go to Cambridge University in England to get a PhD, even though I didn't have a BA. And I finally got my PhD, even though at the beginning, the professors told me I'd done my whole study wrong. I shouldn't have given the chimpanzees names. They should have had numbers. That was scientific. And I couldn't talk about them having personalities or minds capable of thinking. And certainly I couldn't talk about them having emotions like happiness, sadness, fear, despair, because those were unique to us. But fortunately, because the chimpanzees not only behave like us, but they're biologically like us, we share 98.6 of the structure of our DNA with chimpanzees. And so eventually science began to come out of its closed box and realize, no, we humans are not the only beings with personalities, minds, and emotions. And of course I learned all that as a child from my childhood teacher. And that teacher with whom I spent hours and hours was my dog. You can't share your life in a meaningful way with any animal and not know, of course, animals have personalities and minds and emotions. When I left that conference, having learned about the plight of the chimpanzees, I went as a scientist, I left as an activist. I knew I had to do something to help, but I didn't know what to do. First of all, I got a little bit of money and went out to Africa to learn more about what was happening to the chimpanzees in different parts of their range. And indeed, I learned a lot. But I also learned about the problems faced by so many of the African communities living in and around chimpanzee habitat. I flew over the Little Gombe National Park. In 1960, it was part of what we call the Equatorial Forest Belt, a forest that stretched from East Africa through the Great Congo Basin to the West African coast. And when I flew over in 1990, I looked down on a little island of forest surrounded by completely bare hills, more people living there than the land could support, too poor to buy food from elsewhere, struggling to survive. And that's when it hit me. If we don't do something to improve the lives of the people, there's no way we can even try to save the chimpanzees. And that's when the Jane Goodall Institute began our program, Take Care, or TACARI as it's known as. And it's a very holistic program, and working to restore fertility to the overused land, having the villagers themselves choose to set aside land for regeneration of the forest, because when you cut down the forest on steep slopes, you have terrible soil erosion. And we also work with the Tanzanian authorities to improve education and health facilities. We introduced water management programs. We introduced what I think has been the most successful innovation, microcredit programs for mostly women, based on Muhammad Yunus's Grameen Bank. Yunus took me to Bangladesh. I met the women who'd been helped by his vision, and I knew we had to try this in Tanzania, and it worked. And so we also provide family planning information and scholarships to keep girls in school after puberty, because all around the world, as women's education improves, as women are empowered, family size tends to drop. Don't you find it strange that it's seriously believed that right around the world we can have unlimited economic development, unlimited development of our shopping malls and all these things on a planet that has finite natural resources. And in some instances, the natural resources are being taken more quickly than Mother Nature can restore them. Our Tochari program was so successful. We began working with the villagers, teaching them how to use smartphones. They monitor the health of their forests, their village forest reserves. And all this information which they record goes up onto a platform in the clouds, Global Forest Watch. It's transparent. And we now have programs similar to Tochari in 6 other African countries, including Burundi and Uganda. We have representatives from both those countries here today. And so all of this costs money. At any rate, after that conference, when I became an activist, I began traveling around the world. Now it's about 300 days every year, learning more about what's happening in the rest of the world, learning about the pollution of air, water, and land, learning about the destruction of the rainforest, learning about the plastic that's cluttering up the ocean, and the pollution that is causing it to acidify. Finding out that the 2 great lungs of the world, the forests and the ocean, are being destroyed. Reckless burning of fossil fuel so that the CO2 emissions are forming a blanket around the planet, known as the greenhouse gases, trapping the heat of the sun, leading to the kind of climate change that is now making itself felt all around the world, from the melting of the ice, the Arctic and the Antarctic and the great glaciers, to the uneven weather patterns with more and worse hurricanes and tornadoes, worse droughts and worse flooding. We're messing up our world. And not surprising that as I was traveling around the world, spreading awareness, first of all, about what was happening to the chimpanzees, the rainforest, and all the rich biodiversity that you find in the rainforest. I mean, we call it biodiversity today. I think of it as the rich tapestry of life. And when I'm in the rainforest, and I've been so lucky to spend hours and hours in the rainforest, I feel this great spiritual power from which I can derive strength. So here I am, traveling around a world that we are destroying. Not surprising, I met young people, like some of you young people here today. And I'm not talking about my Roots and Shoots students, but there are other students from high school. And I found so many who were just not seeming to care, just apathetic. Others who were deeply depressed, others who were angry. And when I began talking to them, they said, well, you've harmed our future, and there's nothing we can do about it. Have we harmed the future of you young people? Yes, we have. There's a saying, we haven't inherited this planet from our parents, we've borrowed it from our children. But we have not been borrowing our children's future, we've been stealing it, and we're still stealing it. But were the young people right when they said, there's nothing we can do about it? I say there's a window of time when, if we get together around the world, we can start to heal some of the scars that we've inflicted. We'll never get things exactly back as they were, but we can certainly make a difference. And I think from what you've heard this morning about these wonderful 40 students from different parts of the world, that you can understand that my greatest reason for hope is the young people, When young people like this understand the problems, when we listen to their voices, when we empower them to take action, they are changing the world. It's not just that you can, you are changing the world. And Roots and Shoots is now in nearly 80 countries. It's got members in kindergarten and university and everything in between. And they choose their own projects, but one to help people, one to help animals, one to help the environment. And as you heard this morning, Roots and Shoots is a way of breaking down the barriers that we tend to build between people from different nations, different religions, different cultures, and between us and the natural world. And Roots and Shoots is helping young people to understand that we are one human family. And we may have different colored skin, we may wear different clothes, we may worship God by a different name, but if we fall and cut ourselves, the blood is the same. If we cry, our tears are the same. If something makes us laugh, we get that same wonderful feeling of having a good laugh. We are one human family. And this came up this morning. And so for me, Roots and Shoots is my greatest reason for hope. But then there's the human brain. We are now beginning to use our brains to create technology that will enable us to live in harmony with nature instead of always destroying nature. And we're beginning to think how in our own individual lives we can leave lighter ecological footprints. We have choices every day. What do I buy? What do I eat? What do I wear? Where did it come from? How was it made? Did it harm the environment? Did it cause suffering to animals, like the intensive animal farms? Is it cheap because of child slave labor? And if we start making ethical choices, hundreds, thousands, millions, billions will start moving towards the kind of world that will be a better world to leave to our grandchildren. And there are some people in this world who can make choices that will affect millions of people just by the stroke of a pen. And if we can get more business and more politicians to embrace the idea of thinking about future generations when decisions are made, and not just about how will this affect me now, how will this affect the next shareholders meeting, how will this affect my next political campaign, then again we start moving even more quickly towards a better kind of world for the future. Next reason for hope, the resilience of nature. And if you fly over Bombay now, you won't see bare hills. The trees have come back. Last time I was here, I went on your river here, and it was so polluted. The water was kind of yellow, green, horrible. I wouldn't have jumped in it for anything. But now I hear it's much, much cleaner. And we all know places that we have destroyed and made ugly, but with time and maybe some help can become beautiful again. My next reason for hope, social media, used in the right way. Because for the first time in human history, we can bring together the people's voices from around the world, calling out about what they care about one single issue, whether it's climate change or whether it's women's empowerment or whatever it is. And there's strength when you know that all around the world people care about what you care about. And then finally, the indomitable human spirit. The people who tackle what seems to be impossible and won't give up. Like Nelson Mandela, who came out of 17 years of hard physical labor with the amazing ability to forgive. So that with de Klerk, he was able to end that terrible regime of apartheid that hurt me so much when I first landed in Cape Town. And then there are people with severe physical disabilities, and yet they're out there, they're inspiring all around them, they're proving that the human spirit can overcome physical disabilities. There are people who perhaps came into a country as a migrant with nothing, fleeing violence in another country, and somehow they get their lives together and they get perhaps a little store, and in spite of all the misery that they've been through, and maybe the hostility they've faced when they arrived in a new country, if you go and smile at them, they smile back. This indomitable human spirit. And so those are my reasons for hope. But to end where I began my reasons for hope, it's the young people. Listening to you this morning and knowing a lot about what you're doing, thanks to Kelly and her team from Taipei, it's the most empowering for me. It's what gives me the courage to go around the world talking about hope in a world that seems sometimes so hopeless, so depressing, whether it's the environment, or whether it's the political system, whether it's the war, whether it's the poverty, whether it's the corruption. The world can seem a very bleak place. But then I think of all the young people. And if our young people lose hope, we may as well give up. If you don't have hope, why bother? And so, carry on with business as usual. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. But it's not like that. And I, for one, will never give up. And I know that these young people who you saw this morning and heard from this morning, they will never give up. And they will go back to their countries, and they will spread what they've learned here. They will share what they've learned about sustainable development. And that will increase the circles of hope wider and wider. And there are those of you here from other countries, from other universities. Just imagine if you also bring in young people from other countries, and this interaction between these groups of young people being given this wonderful opportunity to study here. So there's the hope for the future, that we all give whatever we can to make this a better world, share whatever gifts we've been given, and never give up. So thank you so much for the opportunity for me to come and talk with you all, and especially thank you, this university, for giving these 40 students a reason for hope.